Hi, ladies. Welcome to week 2 of No Fair. This week we'll be covering a few more chapters than we did last week, chapters 3 through 27. But before we get started, I thought it would be good to look at the way that the book of Job is written, the structure of it. So Job can be daunting to look at it. I have never studied it before I've read it, but it isn't one of my go-to books. But if you know the structure of it, it helps you to navigate it. So let's look a little bit about that. Job is considered wisdom literature, and the aim of it is to teach the reader about justice, suffering, and the role of God in the lives of humans. The book is all about calling into question the reader's view of God in the world, and it certainly does that. The design of the book of Job is very intentional. The author's focus, and as Deb pointed out last week, we don't know who the author is. The focus is on the experiences of Job and his life and the questions that they raise. It's written as a piece of literature, but it deals with and seeks to answer some of the big questions of life. It doesn't give us a clear answer as to why Job is suffering, but it does teach us about the character of God and offers a model of how to handle suffering. In other words, it talks about not why we suffer, but how to suffer. So here's the structure. It opens with the prologue in chapters 1 and 2. We learned about those last week. And here we learn about the dilemma of Job. It's a narrative of what happened to Job. And again, Deb covered all that. It tells a story of Job, who was a really good man. He was overwhelmed by troubles. He is stripped of his family, his wealth, and eventually his health. And he doesn't know why God has done this to him. The neat thing is, as Deb pointed out last week, is that it also gives us a part of the story that no one in the story was aware of. And that is that the part about Satan and God. So God was the only one that knew about it when the story was written. We, in retrospect, get to see that. It's only we, the readers, who get to see behind the scenes and know the interaction between God and Satan and see that God is trying to prove to Satan that Job's faith is genuine. There's a heavenly debate between Job and Satan. And this sets up the questions for the entire book. Basically, why does God allow good people to suffer? Is there justice? And does God rule the world according to the principle of justice? And then it ends with an epilogue of one chapter telling what happened to Job after all this. So there's the prologue and the epilogue. And in between all of that is several chapters, 24 chapters of Hebrew poetry. And this is when we look at poetry, Hebrew poetry is very different than English or Western poetry. Hebrew poetry seems to be governed by balance between the lines rather than the kind like we have blank verse, free verse, narrative, haiku, sonnets, ballad. You all learned about those at school sometimes. There's actually over 50 types of poetry in the Western world. And it looks very different than what we consider poetry, but it's poetry. So the book of Job is considered poetry, even though it looks different. The vocabulary is also said to be the most expansive of any other Hebrew literature. That means that it actually uses more Hebrew words than any other book in the Bible. It uses words that we don't even actually know the meanings yet. And if you look in your Bibles at the bottom, it will say, at a footnote, it'll say, the translation is unclear on this part. Well, that's just because we don't know what that word means yet. And there's still room to study and learn those things, and there are people who are doing that. The meanings at the time were assumed through sister languages, through the context, which we learned about in Proverbs, and it has a general idea, but again, research is still being done to find out the details. So this section consists of verses 3 through 37. In these chapters, Job and 4 friends who have come to comfort him have several conversations known as the debates of Job. This is the section we will begin to explore this week. It is constructed in 3 cycles of conversations between Job, beginning with and ending each cycle with his friends speaking to him in between. So Job would speak, the friends would reply, and they'd go back and forth, and then Job would sum it up. Chapter 28, which we'll start with next week, starts with a monologue by Job about the difference between heavenly and earthly wisdom. And this provides an interlude before the conversation with the 4th friend begins. And then the 4th friend speaks, creating another interlude, and then there's a last section that talks about the deliverance of Job. And this section is a conversation between God and Job, where God will speak to him and give him a bit of divine perspective before we see the end of the story. And there'll be some surprise lessons to learn. But that's for coming weeks. So now that we have an idea of the structure of the book, let's pick it up from last week. Job 2:11, it says, when Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud. And Deb talked about how it kind of left it at that. There they were, grieving with their friend. In Job chapter 3, it begins the dialogue between Job and his friends, which becomes a major part of the book. Actually, it's 25 chapters, so most of the book is this dialogue. As we read through these chapters, it becomes clear that Job and all his friends had an assumption or worldview from which they saw the situation. And that is that bad things don't happen to good people. Don't we all wish that was true? So our first point is, who says bad things don't happen to good people? Let's look at some people that bad things have happened to. What about Joseph in the Old Testament? Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. He was in prison. He worked his way to the top. His boss's wife tried to seduce him. He was sent back to prison. He worked his way up again, and Joseph was the leader over many of the things that the Pharaoh of Egypt had put him in command of. He didn't see his family for 22 years from the time he was sold into slavery. This is him talking in Genesis 50:20. Talking to his brothers, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Okay, what about Jesus? In Matthew 16, Jesus was talking to his disciples about all the hard things that would be coming. He didn't paint a very rosy picture, but he ended up giving them hope. In Matthew 16:33, he said, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Or Jesus again in the garden as he prayed before going to the cross in Matthew 26:39. He went a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. I've gone through some difficult years in my life. In 1995, my son Joshua, my firstborn, was diagnosed with cancer. And I'll never forget when we went to the City of Hope, which is this amazing treatment facility. One of the things that part of the induction, when you first go for the first time, you see all of these different departments. And so we went in to have a meeting with a social worker. Josh was 18, so he could do it on his own, but he wanted me with him whenever we went to those. And I'll never forget the social worker saying to Josh, wow, you must be pretty mad finding out these last couple months that you've had cancer. And he said, why wouldn't it happen to me? He said, I'd much more rather it be me than someone who doesn't know Jesus. We hadn't talked about that ahead of time, and he was just a regular kid. But that perspective has reminded me many times in my life when we are so quick to say, why me? Maybe the better question is, why not me? The fact is, bad things do happen to good people. So back to Job. Weeks have gone by since he was afflicted with a horrible disease, and God does not explain to Job what he's doing. Sound familiar? Remember, Job knows nothing of the conversation between God and Satan, and his friends had been silent. And when finally Job spoke, we can see that his emotions have become a real roller coaster. In Job 3:1, at last Job spoke, and he cursed the day of his birth. He said, "Let the day of my birth be erased and the night I was conceived. Why wasn't I born dead? Why didn't I die when I came from the womb? Why wasn't I laid on my mother's lap? Why did she nurse me on her breast?" Job is a man bereaved. He's humiliated and he's in pain. His skin is festering, his nerves are on fire, his heart is broken, and he's crushed by the unbearable weight of sorrow and pain. When he cursed the day of his birth and questioned why he had even been born, he was expressing that pain, insisting that life under the conditions that he must now bear is not worthwhile. Because he is conscious of no wrongdoing, he sees no justice in the way he must suffer. But even so, he does not curse God. He was lamenting. A lament is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. To lament is to mourn a loss or a death. Laments aren't unusual in the Bible. In fact, over a third of, probably about 50 of the Psalms are laments. The prophets likewise cried out to God, like Jeremiah, who in Jeremiah 15:18 said, "Why is my pain continuous and my wound incurable?" And Habakkuk in 3:16 says, "My legs tremble beneath me. I await the day of distress that will come upon the people who attack me." And one whole book, the book of Lamentations, expresses the confusion and suffering felt after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. We find something similar in the New Testament as well. Jesus himself laments to the Father, again in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me." That's in Mark 14:36. Or when he makes the words of Psalm 22 his own, and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus was lamenting. We can learn something from Job here. It's okay, even good, to be honest with God. We don't need to be afraid to tell him what we're thinking and feeling. He already knows it better than we do. So in his first speech, Job laments over everything that he's lost. All of the important things of his life have been stripped away, and death seemed like the only logical relief for him. So he cries out for death, cursing the day he was born. And though he speaks of his birthday, he is actually expressing his longing for death. Remember, he doesn't know the part about the challenge between God and Satan. So here's what he does know. He knows he's undergone severe testing. He knows he's experienced one devastating calamity after the other. He has lost his possessions. He has lost all 10 of his children. He has lost his health and is afflicted with a disfiguring disease. Even his wife has turned against him, telling him to curse God and kill himself. His challenges were physical, emotional, relational, and financial, and most importantly, spiritual. He's a mess. But even then, God still trusts in God's mercy and love. He steadfastly resists Satan, who wants Job to curse God and die. And this is where his friends step in to offer comfort and advice of their own. So let's talk about Job's 3 friends. There's 4 altogether, but we'll talk about another one next week. Here's what they did right. Even though Job's comforters reached wrong conclusions, they were his friends. Of all the people that Job knew, remember, he was the wealthiest and most righteous man in the area, so he was probably known far and wide. They were the only ones that came to comfort him. They mourned silently with him for 7 days without talking about him behind his back. And after Job breaks his silence, a debate follows where they basically say that Job is suffering because of his sin. And with each of the 3 rounds of debate, he gets more and more emotional. They all said some good and true things, as well as some foolish things. They all had their own explanation for the why, and none of them were right. Their intentions were good. From a literary perspective, the 3 friends represent the best of ancient Near Eastern literature and the thinking of God about suffering and the human condition. This was the way it was thought about at that time. But it doesn't mean what they say is true or right. So there are 3 cycles of debate. But there is one important respect in which Job's speech differs from that of his friends. They talk to Job about God. Job talks to God and sometimes addresses them. But Job is not arguing a point. He is trying to understand his experience, even talking to himself as he struggles in his own mind. What he says and prays shocks his religious friends, but at least he keeps the conversation with God going. It is also notable that after Job's losses that we learned about in chapter 2, and the losses and illness of chapters 1 and 2, his concern from here on out is God, not his wealth, not his health, but his life with and his relationship with God. So let's look at the 3 cycles of debate. There's cycle 1 is chapters 3 through 14. Cycle 2 is chapters 15 through 21. And cycle 3 is chapters 22 to 28. I told you this was a lot of chapters this week. And this is the basic how it goes. Job speaks, then his friend Eliphaz the Temanite would respond to what he says. And then Job would have a response, and then Bildad would throw his 2 cents in on what he thought was going on. And then Job would speak to that, and then Zophar, the Naamathite, and then Job would respond. And that happened 3 times, except in the 3rd cycle, Zophar didn't, maybe he had run out of things to say, I don't know. So let's meet these 3 friends. We've all heard the term Job's comforters. Well, that's just basically telling people that they aren't helping. Not something you'd want to be known for. Eliphaz insists that righteous people do not suffer. Only the wicked are tormented in this fashion. He says, for Job to declare himself innocent is to charge Yahweh with injustice. That a man should not be more than God is unreasonable. Eliphaz argues that in God's sight, no human being is righteous. All humans have sinned, and any suffering they must endure is a just punishment for their transgressions. He was the most wordy of the 3. Bildad adds his support to what Eliphaz says by insisting that God does not pervert justice, neither does he ever act unrighteous. And then Zophar goes even further in his accusations against Job. Job is not being punished as much as he deserves, for Yahweh is both a just and merciful God, he says. And mercy always means treating a person better than that person deserves. To each of these 3 speeches, Job makes an effective reply. He challenges the accusers to point out what evil has he done, if they could say what it is specifically. He said, if he has failed simply because he is mortal, it is not his fault, for he was created that way. He's a man like you or I. Or, well, we're women, but the same idea. His conduct has been as good as his accusers, he says. After the first round of speeches, the cycle is repeated, with Job again making a reply after each of his friends speaks. And in the 3rd cycle of speeches, only Eliphaz and Bildad speak. In Job's final reply, he makes a masterful defense of his own position, at the conclusion of which we are told the words of Job are ended. So for 23 chapters, they go around and around trying to explain why these things have happened and what Job should do. So let's look at the themes of the cycles. So basically, the theme of cycle 1 is that God punishes the wicked and blesses the good. That's chapters 4 through 14. And this was in keeping with their worldview. What they knew and believed at the time was that if you did something good, you would be blessed. If you did something bad, you'd be punished. It isn't always true, and we know that with the wicked are eventually punished, and God does bless those who seek and honor him, but not always when we think it should happen or even with our knowledge. The theme for cycle 2 is that the wicked suffer and perish because they are against God, and that's chapters 15 to 21. Again, this was the thought of the day, but the definition of the wicked should not be determined by man. It is God who decides who is wicked. And cycle 3, the theme is God is majestic, but Job is wicked. That's chapters 22 to 27. Everything to them was an either-or mentality. God is always majestic, but that in and of itself does not mean Job is wicked. Thankfully for us, we have a bigger picture for which to view the story, and that gives us a whole different perspective. For Job's part, he made 3 basic complaints in this entire section. I'm going to quote a lot of verses in the next couple sections. So if you want to have a pen to write it down, great. If not, that's up to you, but I just want to warn you. In Job 13:24, he says, "Why do you turn away from me? Why do you treat me as your enemy?" Talking to God. Again, in Job 19:7, he says, "I cry out, help, but no one answers me. I protest, but there is no justice." And then in Job 30:20, "I cry to you, O God, but you don't answer. I stand before you, but you don't even look." The second position that Job had, the complaint that he had was, God is punishing me. If you look at Job chapter 6, verse 4, it says, "For the Almighty has struck me down with his arrows. Their poison infects my spirit. God's terrors are lined up against me." In chapter 7, verse 20, "If I have sinned, what have I done to you, O watcher of all humanity? Why make me your target? Am I a burden to you?" And then in Job 9:17, he says, "For he attacks me with a storm and repeatedly wounds me without a cause." And then the third complaint that Job has is that God allows the wicked to prosper. In Job 21:7 and 8, he says, "Why do the wicked prosper, growing old and powerful? They live to see their children grow up and settle down, and they enjoy their grandchildren." There are times when we have all felt these same things. God's not listening. Well, it might seem that way, but we know by faith and trust that it's not true. God is punishing me. Well, is there something I need to repent from? Sometimes life just happens. And the third, why don't other people have the same bad things happen to them? My perspective is limited. I don't really know everything that is going on in their life. It's interesting, that third one is probably the one that I struggle the most with. I can feel or sound like everything's great. I lost my son and all of those other things, and everything's just always honky-dory. But I'll tell you, when I hear of someone who has a son around Josh's age who has cancer, and the treatment they gave worked, or God chose to heal him, I have to be honest, I'm happy for them, but I wonder, how come that didn't happen to Josh? And in reality, I know God has the whole thing, but those thoughts definitely come to mind for me, and I probably for the rest of my life, I'll have to struggle with those because I don't know the answers to it. We mostly think these things because we have an incorrect worldview that bad things don't happen to good people. We wish that bad things didn't happen to good people, but the reality is, and point 2, is bad things happen. We live in an imperfect, fallen world. The worldview that Job and the others had, and many have today, needs a wake-up call. What about the book of Proverbs and all the instructions it gave us to be wise so that we would receive good things? Well, for those of you that went through the book of Proverbs with us, you'll remember that although all of the instruction on how to be wise was good, it was generally true, not always true. In fact, Scripture makes it clear that bad things do and will happen. Here's some verses I'm going to rattle off again. Psalm 13, 1 through 6. David says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" James 1, 2, and 3 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for that you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." Romans 5, 3-5 says, "More than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit." Romans 8:18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." When we read all these, it really should make us adjust our worldview, that it's not true that bad things don't happen to good people. In fact, all of these verses from the New Testament actually are there to give us hope in the middle of them. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No temptation has taken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will always provide a way of escape." Matthew 5:45 says, "So that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust." Jesus said, "I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation," he says, "but take heart, for I have overcome the world." Ecclesiastes 9:11, and we're going to do Ecclesiastes in one of our next Bible study sessions, so we'll get more into this. But it says in verse 9:11, it says, "I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance happen to them all." We say, how can this be? I thought if I gave my life to Jesus, everything would be rosy. I thought if I trusted God, he would make sure only good things happen to me. I don't understand. Well, here's the thing. Remember last week, Deb talked about how we grow through pain. This is the third point. Trust does not mean we need to understand. Trust is a firm belief in in reliability, in truth, in ability, or strength of someone or something. When I say I trust God, it means I have a firm belief in the reliability, truth, and strength of God. It's not dependent on the circumstances or my feelings, no matter what. Here's some more verses that talk about trust and understanding. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." Isaiah 55, 8, and 9. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Job 36, 26, Job says, "How great is God beyond our understanding." Job 11, 7 through 9, he said, "Can you fathom the mysteries of God? Can you probe the limits of the Almighty? They are higher than the heavens above. What can you do? They are deeper than the depths below. What can you know? Their measure is longer than the earth and wider than the sea." And then in Romans 11, verses 33 to 35, it says, "Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments, his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor?" God really doesn't owe us an explanation for everything. That's one of, I think, the most freeing things that we can do is to realize that we don't always get to or have to know why. We want to know why. We think we need to know why. We demand to know why. But reality is the Bible is filled with stories of people who didn't get to know why. Sometimes we'll know at the time something happens and we'll know exactly why. Sometimes we'll know later. Most of the time, we'll never know. There's a worship song I love called New Wine by Hillsong. And almost every time I'm going through, and this can be multiple times a day, there's something that I don't understand, a line of that song comes to mind. And it says, "So I yield to you into your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand." Instead of asking why in the midst of our pain, the book of Job affirms God's control and asks us, where are we in our pain? Are we trusting our Creator, even though we cannot understand our circumstances? And what about those friends? Why do you think they reacted so strongly? Job 16:21, Job said, "Now you too have proved to be of no help. You see something dreadful and are afraid." You think maybe it's because they were afraid the same thing could happen to them? They had to defend their basic premise that God always rewards the righteous and punishes the evil so that they would be safe. As long as they were righteous, nothing evil could happen to them. When difficult things happen to people like us, it makes the possibility of the same thing happening very real. I remember when my son Josh died, and there were some of his friends' parents that felt uncomfortable around me. And it was okay because I knew that the reality is they realized that this could happen to them. It came from out of the blue. It makes things a little more real and closer to home. So many couples I've known who have gotten a divorce, and one of the spouses, the other people, aren't comfortable to be around them because if their marriage can fail, then it means maybe their marriage can fail. It's that fear of what we thought was unknown coming very close to home and making it a possibility. God used Job to challenge them to go deeper into the heart and mind of God. So the fourth point is, what kind of friend do you want to be? Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they have many disciples today. Whenever you meet a person who feels compelled to explain everything, or who has a pat answer for every question and a formula for every problem, you are literally back on the ash heap with Job's friends. Eliphaz was a kind of friend who based everything on his own observation and experience. Bildad was the kind who depended on things staying the same and keeping with the traditions that he was comfortable with. Zophar was the kind of friend who just based things on his own assumptions. What kind of friend do you want to be? We all have good intentions. We feel the need to say something, to comfort, to explain, to encourage people. Sometimes those things have the opposite effect. I had never experienced loss when my son died. And so I would never have known what to say to someone. But as several people came to comfort me, I knew that their intentions were good. But when people said things like, God needed him in heaven, that didn't make me feel better. How about this one? Oh, at least you have another son. This one, a dear friend said, God was saving him from some bad choices later on. You know, none of those were comforting to me. It would have been better maybe if, like Deb talked about last week, there was just silence. What if we just listened? What if we were just present? What if we just prayed? Believe me, that is a gift that would bring comfort to anyone. So I have 3 takeaways for you and 1 question to go with. Who says bad things don't happen to good people? What do you believe? What is your worldview? It makes a difference. 2, bad things happen. We live in a fallen, imperfect world. just look around. 3, trust does not mean that we need to understand. In fact, we need to trust because we don't understand. But that makes our faith even sweeter. And then the question is, what kind of friend do you want to be? It's up to us. I hope that you have a great discussion with your group, and that I loved what Deb said last week, and which we all feel, is that it's during that discussion time when we break some of these things down and actually share our life experiences in these very things and what we've learned that can really make a difference. So I hope that as you go with your group, that some of the discussion will be life-changing. Don't be afraid to share some of your thoughts, because you never know how God might use that in somebody else's life. Have a great week.